Analysis lesson presented to you by Miss Mur. Today I want to just quickly go over the power of connotations for specific words. We'll touch on our structural approach to the language analysis essay, and then I will go through some annotations of an article that you will be looking at in our next lesson. So, the power of a single word. You should be aware by now that some words have incredible power, and with them they will bring many connotations. So obviously connotations or implied meaning in particular words are central to your language analysis study. So this is a really, really important aspect of what you should focus on in your analysis, and also what you should write about. So when you are annotating, you really should be looking for the words that sing out to you. And at first glimpse, you might not know why, but you'll just get the impression that these words are significant. So underline them, and again, always remember you should have your dictionary with you when you do your language analysis sack. So you can look up particular words, and that will help you with unpacking implied meaning. Okay, so just to go over again what a connotation actually is. It's basically an idea or feeling which a word invokes for a person in addition to its literal or primary meaning. So really it comes back to that notion that when a particular word has implied meaning, it makes you feel something or it makes you think something. It really all just comes under that, it comes down to that. There is a huge list of synonyms, obviously, that goes with the word connotation, so you don't have to repeat the word connotation throughout your language analysis essay. In fact, I encourage you to use a variety of different words when you're unpacking the meaning underlying key phrases and terms. Some of those synonyms are listed here. There are obviously many, many more. So pause this screencast, make a note of some of these keywords so you are varying your language in your essays. Again, a word that has connotations will make people feel something, will make people think something, or the word will do something to you. So if it stands out in a piece of writing, it's usually because it has connotations that make us feel or think something. That's the key to success. This is a little example. I think this is one of Mr. Armstrong's favourite examples, so let's have a look at it. The school was invaded with a crackpot idea to ban end-of-year celebrations for Year 12 students. So yes, there's an argument that is there, and the argument is that this writer thinks that end-of-year celebrations are important, but they're doing it in a way that really relies on two key words, and those words have been put in bold, and they are invaded and crackpot. Verbs are really important when you're looking for words with implied meaning, or words that are meant to make you want to feel and think something. So make sure that if you're struggling, narrow it down, narrow your selection process down to specific verbs as well as any other words that you might come across. So I would always start with adjectives and verbs myself. Okay, so let's have a look at the connotations of these words. Let's start with invaded. So there are three examples here of the implications of the word invaded. So invaded means quick and with much force, which could be suggested that the idea has been forced upon us and has not been thought through properly. Now, you really should be able to get these specific ideas in order to unpack your language through your use of the dictionary. It's really not rocket science, this stuff. I know a lot of you feel like it's a bit vague, the connotations of keywords, but if you're looking up the meaning of the words and you really think about what that word means in the context of the argument, it should become clearer. Use a dictionary. I can't say it enough. So invaded, on point 2 there, can also be described as militaristic language, which has connotations of a strict environment where people are conditioned to think one way. So you might see in your dictionary linked to the word invaded military, which then has further connotations. It evokes a sense of a tough environment and not a free-thinking place, which makes us think of uniformity. So, and the fact that uniformity is celebrated versus the uniqueness of each individual. So you can see here that just from that one word, we can write and write and write. A lot of it's instinct, but again, I encourage you to use your dictionary. There's no excuse not to have one with you in the sack. Let's look at crackpot. Okay, so we know that the word crackpot is colloquial in style, and it means that the writer could be trying to appeal to readers' common sense, so their common understanding. The writer's not putting themselves on a pedestal, and he is trying to relate to his readership or audience. Crackpot is also slang for an eccentric person, or especially one with bizarre ideas. And then the third point there, schools should be rational places, not prone to such ideas or thinking. So if we look at this again, it's all about feel, think, do. So what is this word designed to make us think? What's it designed to make us feel? And what should happen in response to this idea or in response to this word? Just touching on our original kind of mapping out of annotations and grouping together of different appeals and arguments. Obviously, you should now be quite comfortable with your use of the acronym TICUS in your introductions. Make sure you always include your introduction, title, author and date, if there is one. And as I've said to you, this is a really great framework to start with, but you should be completely dictated by the material you get on the day. So whether that's in the SAC or in the end of year exam, it's really important that you have this sort of notion of how you think you should approach the task in the first place, but then you know that depending on what you're presented with, you will adjust that approach. So we've talked about, the nature of particular articles will dictate whether or not you do a lot of writing on emotional appeals or whether or not you really focus on the logical side of things. And I know a lot of you find the ethics and values part tricky, but it would be my suggestion to look at the image as a whole paragraph instead of trying to do everything in one paragraph, as my map would suggest. So there are other options, is what I'm saying. Make sure you know what you're looking for when you're annotating, but be prepared to tweak your structure. Okay, here is just an example of what you would do if you had two completely evenly sized pieces. Now, some of you write heaps and heaps and heaps, and that's fantastic, in which case I would suggest, more than 3 main body paragraphs, because I think sometimes some students try and do too much in one. Whereas other students, I think this is a really helpful guideline to contain your ideas and also compare and contrast within the paragraph. So put quite simply, this approach looks at the first thing the writer wants the readers to think, and then what sort of deliberate word choices, so connotations, all those things, and how or what does it add to the arguments. This is really straightforward. So if the other approach looks too complicated for you, you can switch to this approach. Again, I think it's just really important that you are able to tweak your approach depending on the material you're obviously presented with. So that takes me to the article that you are working on today. So in a moment, I'm going to get you to do some drills, some writing drills, some timed writing. But if we have a look at this article, which you should have already read through, I've just gone through and annotated what I think I would focus on if I was writing about it. And you are more than welcome to use these annotations, or you can do your own. It's up to you. So for the first column there, with the headline, "What We Wear is Really to Die For," I haven't annotated that title, but you obviously could. And I think if you were to comment on that title, I think you would comment on the sort of the cliche of "to die for" being something that someone would comment on when they see a pair of shoes that they love or an outfit that they love. They would say, "Oh, that outfit is to die for." So what this article is focused on, as you know, though, is the deaths in Bangladeshi garment factories where buildings collapsed and killed many Bangladeshis. So let's start. That first blue section, this part up here, obviously I've highlighted that in blue because I see it as quite a rational, quite moderate, and indeed logical approach to the issue. So I've made a note here that the tone for the first section is observational. This is about someone standing back, looking at the issue and making sense of it. So again, reread this in your own time and have a think about why I would say that this writer has taken on board an observational tone in this first instant. What sort of power does that bring with it, and what sort of types of persuasive how does that persuade the audience? Having an observational tone, what does that bring to the audience's perception of the writer when they start off this way? I would suggest that the reader is going to think of the writer as someone who is informed, is calm, is considered about their approach to this, and has, sort of stood back and observed the various issues at hand. In the second paragraph there, yes, there are rhetorical questions. Again, be very careful that you don't just mine language analysis articles with question marks, because I think some essays end up really being way too simplistic in that the student has just looked for where the question marks are and decided that everything's rhetorical. So what I would probably focus on in this second paragraph are the words collapse, bewildered and overwhelmed, and some of the connotations that emerge through those words. You might decide that you disregard that completely and not write about it at all. Certainly there are more opportunities for good writing in the rest of the piece, but we'll keep going. The next two paragraphs, which I've highlighted in yellow, which have a sort of ethical focus, really paint the writer as someone who aligns herself with particular professionals and their observations. So this kind of positioning of oneself as having values that are parallel to those of another is significant. So what you want to be able to do is pinpoint the particular values that she highlights in these two paragraphs. The idea of a wake-up call, again, is adopting language that's colloquial, so not unlike the example of crackpot. It's colloquial language that positions the writer in relation to the audience in a way that is not patronising. It's not sort of elevating the writer above the reader's experience, and it speaks directly to the audience.